All right, let's dive right into today's explainer because we are tackling something absolutely wild. It's one of the most universally intense, chaotic, and just flat out fascinating emotional experiences known to humanity. I mean, we're talking about a feeling that has literally started wars, inspired our greatest literature, and driven otherwise perfectly rational people to the brink of absolute madness. Today, we're decoding the science of love madness. So I want you to think back for a second. Have you ever been madly, entirely, hopelessly in love with someone, but you just weren't sure if they loved you back? You know the kind of overwhelming, all-consuming crush I'm talking about. The kind where your stomach completely drops every single time your phone buzzes, where you overanalyze a single three-word text message for 3 hours, and where the line between absolute euphoria and total despair hinges entirely on how this one specific person looks at you. It can feel debilitating. But it turns out it's not just a poetic curse. Which brings us to part one, the madness of love. Let's look at what falling into this state actually entails. See, this isn't just about thinking someone's cute. We're talking about a measurable psychological state. It involves incredibly intrusive thoughts about a potential partner, thoughts that can sometimes take up 80 to 90% of your waking hours. There's this intense dependency on their actions to regulate your own mood. People even report a literal physical ache right in the center front of their chest when uncertainty peaks, and that's usually accompanied by an extreme fear of rejection. And often, the only temporary cure? Finding fleeting relief by vividly imagining a scenario where they finally reciprocate your feelings. So yeah, this goes way beyond a simple schoolyard crush. This is a state that can severely impact a person's day-to-day functioning. We're talking about a condition where your career, your existing relationships, and honestly, your own well-being are suddenly pushed entirely to the background. Everything gets sacrificed on behalf of this all-consuming need for one individual. Moving on to part two, defining limerence and giving this madness a scientific label. Enter our official diagnosis, so to speak. The term is limerence. It's formally defined as the mental state of being madly in love or intensely infatuated when reciprocation of the feeling is uncertain. Now, this word was coined by a psychologist named Dorothy Tanov. She realized that just using the word love to describe this state was causing massive semantic confusion. Why? Because love can also mean selfless caring or a calm, long-term affection. She needed a brand new word to specifically describe this agonizing, uncertain, obsessive state and to draw a hard line between it and general healthy affection. And Tanov didn't just pull this concept out of thin air. Back in the 1960s and 70s, she sat down and interviewed over 500 people to collect data on the topic of love. In her role as a professor, she was constantly encountering people who were experiencing severe heartbreak and absolute personal peril over unrequited feelings. All of this massive data compilation eventually became her seminal 1979 book, Love and Limerence. Now, here's what's truly fascinating. Just how common this feeling is. Not everyone experiences limerence, which Tanov actually discovered when she spoke to a friend who found the whole concept completely alien. But surveys suggest that roughly 55% of the population has experienced it, while 45% hasn't. For that 45%, describing limerence to them is kind of like trying to describe the color red to someone who's been blind from birth. But for the 55% who have been there, it is an undeniable, life-altering reality. A key mechanism of limerence is something called crystallization. This is essentially our brain's remarkable ability to play tricks on us. When you're limerent, it's not that you're totally blind. You actually do see the flaws of the person you desire, the limerent object, as Tanov called them. But you actively overlook those flaws, or incredibly, you reinterpret them as attractive quirks. This concept was originally described by the 19th century French writer Stendhal. Basically, your brain crystallizes the person into an idealized, flawless version of themselves, and that imaginary construction is what you're actually reacting to. All right, part three, famous cases of limerence, both historical and fictional. Humans have been wrestling with this exact feeling for centuries. Look back at the 12th century. We have the tragic longing of Heloise for the philosopher Peter Abelard. Their letters depict this intense limerence long after they were physically separated. Jump to the 13th century, and the great poet Dante was so overcome with unrequited obsession for a woman named Beatrice that a single refusal to speak to him caused him to weep bitterly. Fast forward to 1822, Stendhal writes his comprehensive work on love, heavily inspired by his own unrequited obsession. And finally, in 1979, Dorothy Tanov gives it a scientific name. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates why our favorite stories are entirely built on the agony of limerence. When you look at fiction, it's literally everywhere. Romeo and Juliet,
That is the quintessential story of limerent madness. Think about Severus Snape's lifelong tragic devotion to Lily Evans in Harry Potter, or the intense, consuming dynamic between Bella Swan and Edward Cullen in Twilight, or Joel Barish desperately trying to erase his memories in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Pop culture absolutely thrives on the intense, uncertain highs and lows of the limerent state.
So let's look under the hood. Part 4, the biology of obsession.
When scientists actually put people who have just fallen madly in love into fMRI machines, the scans are staggering. Looking at a photo of their beloved activates the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, right deep in the midbrain. This area triggers a massive flood of dopamine. And this dopamine rush creates what neuroscientists call incentive salience, which means the object of your affection literally becomes a motivational magnet. Cues about them grab your attention like a basic survival instinct. Biologically and chemically speaking, the early stages of romantic love closely mirror a severe behavioral addiction. The drug just happens to be another person.
But why? Why would nature do this to us? Why engineer such a distracting, maddening state? Well, Tom Bellamy, a neuroscientist who studies this, proposed a fascinating evolutionary theory. He suggests limerence might have evolved as a handicap signal. Think of a peacock's incredibly heavy, cumbersome tail. It proves to a mate that the bird is healthy enough to survive despite the handicap. Bellamy suggests limerence evolved to make you so insanely visibly besotted and handicapped by your obsession that it proved to a potential mate you are completely committed and won't abandon them. Now, there are a couple of other leading evolutionary theories too. Anthropologist Helen Fisher suggests it evolved as courtship attraction, basically a system to force mammals to focus all their mating energy on one specific preferred partner, rather than wasting time. A competing theory argues that this romantic obsession was actually co-opted, meaning evolution simply repurposed the intensely powerful pre-existing brain systems used for mother-infant bonding and just applied them to adult pair bonds. Both neutrally explain why this drive feels like an absolute matter of life and death. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Limerence versus True Love. We need to draw some hard lines here. First off, it's absolutely crucial to clarify what limerence is not. It often gets confused with a clinical condition called erotomania. Erotomania is a delusional disorder where a person falsely, genuinely believes someone is in love with them, completely ignoring all clear rejections. Limerence is different. A person in limerence might desperately grasp for hope and wildly overanalyze a random text message, sure, but they are tethered to reality. They fundamentally understand the uncertainty, and if faced with clear, outright rejection, they comprehend it, even if it causes them agonizing love sickness. Furthermore, we really have to contrast limerence, which is often categorized as passionate love, with companionate love. Passionate love is a chaotic hodgepodge of ecstatic highs, deep anxiety, obsession, and a desperate longing for union. It thrives on uncertainty. Companionate love, however, is what we see in deeply entwined, secure, long-term relationships. It's the deep affection, security, and selfless caring you feel for someone whose life is tied up with yours, existing completely without that desperate, anxious need for reciprocation. To put this in perspective, sociologist John Allen Lee created a famous color wheel of love styles, and it maps out exactly where limerence fits. It aligns almost perfectly with a love style known as mania. Manic lovers are obsessively preoccupied and anxiously attached. This is very different from eros, which is romantic and intense, sure, but lacks that blinding crystallization that makes you ignore red flags. And then there's ludus, the game-playing, non-committal style. Interestingly, researchers note that manic, limerent individuals often experience a fatal attraction to ludic partners. This traps them in a terrible cycle of uncertainty that only fuels the limerence further. All of this brings us to an incredibly poignant quote from Dorothy Tennevo herself. She wrote, "While limerence has been called love, it is not love. Other aspects of your life, including love, are sacrificed in behalf of the all-consuming need." I think this really highlights the heavy, heavy toll the state takes. When you're limerent, you aren't selflessly caring for the other person. You're fiercely pursuing the relief of reciprocation, often at a huge cost to your own peace, your friendships, and your daily life. So, as we wrap up our exploration of the source material today, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. When we look at the brain scans, the history, and the sheer agonizing ecstasy of this condition, what do you think? Is this intense emotional high a beautiful biological gift designed to ensure human pair bonding? Or is it a dangerous, evolutionary addiction that we really must recognize and learn to manage in our modern lives? Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this incredible topic today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.